You know, I think one of the most frustrating things I ever came across as an advocate for Israel happened in a discussion where somebody tried to explain to me that Israel is really responsible for the terrorism that's being used against it because we created and cultivated what they consider to be the root cause of terrorism. I couldn't believe it. I came from a world where you don't look for justifications or explanations why the husband beat his wife. Because he always will say, if you didn't piss me off, if you didn't behave in that way, and many women really believe that their behavior is the root cause of the violence used against them. So they try to alter their behavior. But it doesn't help, because that isn't the root cause. The root cause is something very internal to the man himself. The question is, if we can isolate every one of these variables that people think are the root cause of terrorism, and then find them in other conflicts around the world, from the previous century, from the current century, we should be able to find terrorism in every one of those cases, because they're the root cause of terrorism. But that's not the case. Let's take a look at just a few examples. South Africa, Nelson Mandela, the champion of the black people who brought to the end of the apartheid regime. How did he do it? Did he call for the black population of South Africa to start blowing up in the streets, to start murdering the families of the white regime? Not even once. The man spent 28 years in prison, and not once did he call for the use of violence. Why? The blacks in South Africa were suffering poverty, discrimination, apartheid. Not once did they use terrorism. What about Mahatma Gandhi, the liberator of India? When India was under the control of the biggest empire in the world, Great Britain, did Mahatma Gandhi even once call for his people to use violence? Did he even once call for the use of terrorism? Not even once. To the contrary, he became famous and synonymous to the philosophy of passive and nonviolent resistance. Let's move on. Did Martin Luther King, who would stand proud today, ever once call for the black American population to use violence as a means of creating equality, even in a country as late as in the 1960s that had formal laws that prohibited the black population from studying in certain schools, from getting on certain buses, even from drinking from certain fountains? Not once did Martin Luther King call for violent resistance. On the contrary. Now, we don't only have to look to the history. We can look in contemporary times. Look at the people of Tibet. The people of Tibet are suffering Chinese occupations for years. And they have many thousands of casualties, certainly much more than there are Palestinian casualties. Have you ever read in the newspaper or seen on TV a news clip talking about how a Tibetan monk blew up in the streets of China, killing innocent civilians? Not once. How is that possible? They were all under occupation. They were all suffering formal discrimination. They were all poor. Why? Because one variable wasn't there. And that's the variable that we call extremism, fundamentalism, a philosophy that breeds violence. And so when people talk about the root cause of terrorism, talk to them about the root cause of terrorism. Tell them we have to eliminate the root cause of terrorism. Only make sure they understand that the thing we need to eliminate is fundamentalism.